17 and a half. There was some apprehension in my attitude towards going to the war. Of course, it was something totally new to us in New Zealand, to our generation, and there was feelings of apprehension of going over and being involved. 18 when I was drafted. I was drafted into the a training centre in Cambridge, and from there we went to Narrawahia, to the training centre there, and from there to Rotorua, from there to North for further training, and our last place, of course, was Trentham and Wellington, where we left for the Middle East. I had my 21st birthday on the 17th of June, and I was on a troop ship on the 23rd of June. We travelled on a boat called the New Amsterdam, a 45,000-ton liner, and it was built during peacetime to carry passengers. It would carry 1,000 passengers, but there were 7,000 troops on that troop ship. Strange, everything strange. First thing we saw was white hooded people, and I remember seeing some Arabs digging in a pit or something. I don't know what they were doing, and a man standing over them with a whip, and it was quite completely a strange experience, new experience altogether, because Egypt is totally different to the Western world. Well, we loaded our guns, and the troops were loaded at Port Said, and we sailed up the Suez Canal into the Mediterranean and headed toward Italy. One of the big dangers of that trip was the mines that were set in the Mediterranean. We were fortunate our ship was not struck, but the one next to us hit a mine and was fairly badly damaged, but made it to port. And we landed at a place called Bari in Italy, in southern Italy, and from there we went across to the Sangro River, and we were there for several weeks because the bridges had been blown and there was no way of crossing. And we were there for some time waiting to move up to the important Battle of Monte Casino. Things were quite grim at the Sangro River. A number of troops were killed. Another number of men were killed there at the Sangro River. But after some time, the engineers managed to put up a Bailey Bridge, and we crossed with our guns and headed up towards Monte Casino. I think the generals and the hierarchy had expected only a short stay at Monte Casino, but as we know, it lasted there for several months. When we moved up to Monte Casino, we could see Monte Casino very clearly from where we were stationed, and we took over from an American unit who had already tried to bypass Monte Casino up the state highway to Rome, but they were driven back. It was winter time when they tried, and it was very wet. And I think there was something like 2,000 or 3,000 men were lost on that in that battle, so they had to come back. And there are many other nations involved. The Indian troops were involved, the British troops, and the Polish troops. What made it so difficult that the German troops were stationed around the casino, the monastery, and they had a great advantage point because they could see all that was going on, and any movement of troops down below were immediately dealt with. So the highway actually went on the west side of the mountain, Monte Casino, but it was in a narrow passage between another mountain further left, and it was a very difficult passage to get through. On the right of Monte Casino, of course, there was mountainous country, and it was very, very difficult. So we were there for several months. The New Zealand troops went in, I think it was about October, November, but were driven back again, and once again many lives were lost. We fired on Monte Casino with our guns, the 4th Field Artillery, for many hours, and then the tanks went in, but some of the tanks got stuck in the bomb holes that the shells had made, and the Maori troops got up as far as the railway station, and then they were driven back again. So we were there for some time, and during that time, of course, many lives were lost. But finally, the artillery moved up into the mountain position on the right of the Monte Casino and supported the Polish troops, who actually took the monastery and cleared the way for the troops to go up the highway to Rome. I was in the 4th Field New Zealand Artillery and 26th Battery and F Troop, and we were operating a 25-pound field gun. And the strange thing about it, that in New Zealand I was trained in the tanks, and before I left New Zealand, many artillerymen were killed in the Desert Campaign, and they transferred a lot of the troops from the tank corps into the artillery, and I was one of them. So knowing very little about artillery when I first went into action, I had to start just supplying the ammunition to the gun. And then the person who lays the gun, he sets the instruments for the gun, got wounded, and they trained me for that work. So by the time we got into Monte Casino, I was a bombardier, and I had the responsibility of setting the instruments that directed the shell of the gun. So that was my job at Monte Casino. Well, it was quite a hectic time on the particular night that the New Zealand troops were to move into Monte Casino. The Maori troops were heading that. We began firing our artillery at 11 o'clock at night, and we fired continually right till daybreak. And then at daybreak, the American Lancasters came in, the planes came in to bomb Monte Casino, and it was absolutely devastating. Monte Casino was reduced to complete rubble. I have some photos actually of that Monte Casino after the attack, and wave after wave of bombers came in and completely reduced the town of Monte Casino. The town of Monte Casino, of course, was below the mountain. The Monte Casino itself was just sitting on top of the mountain. The monastery there was sitting on top of the mountain. That was reduced to rubble, and it would seem that no one could possibly survive. But it's amazing that we learnt later that underneath the monastery there was a great tunnel, and a lot of the troops were hiding there. The German troops were hiding there, and they were well dug in. And as soon as our tanks tried to get in, and the Maori troops tried to move up the railway line into the station, they were driven back. And many lives. It was completely unsuccessful. Simply, I think, because that the mountain provided such a wonderful strategic situation for warfare. I think the mountain was their saviour, so they were driven back, and from there we just regrouped again and waited until the time when our artillery moved to the mountains, and we supported the Polish troops then, who used a lot of many mules to carry their ammunition and guns because of the mountainous terrain there, and they were successful. Of course, they lost a lot of men too during that attack. During that, or soon after the first attack, the artillery moved up into a mountain position, and it was a terrible road to get up there. The gun quads and the ammunition trucks couldn't possibly negotiate a corner with one sweep. We had to back up several times, and it was quite an ordeal getting up there, and we had to go up by night because the road leading to the mountain position which we were to take led very close to where the German troops were stationed, so we had to go in at night up by night and with less noise as possible. So that was quite an experience. And but when we got up there, the Germans soon discovered we were there, and they began to shell us. So we had no dull moments waiting for the next attack. One of the things that probably harassed us most of all was what we call harassing fire. That their artillery would fire a shell every 2 minutes, every 3 minutes, 5 minutes, then have half an hour, but all night just to keep us awake. So that was probably the worst part of waiting, is the harassing fire. Of course, we used to do that too, but to get enough sleep and rest was one of the greatest problems. We didn't know at the time who was there, but all we thought that the German troops, although reading articles later about the situation, they say that the German troops were not actually in the monastery. Yeah. But a lot of the monks were still there. But before, just prior to the battle, they moved many of the old treasures and artifacts out of the monastery back into Rome. It was our gun, the gun that I was operating, that fired the leaflets into the monastery sometime before the attack, warning civilians and anyone who occupied the monastery to move out because of the attack. And during war, you seem to forget about the value of historic things, and I think all our concern was is to drive the Germans off that mountain. Personally, I wasn't thinking about what we were destroying at the time, but it was afterward, after the battle was over, and we realized what we had destroyed, that probably, personally, I wouldn't have been happy about destroying it. Slept outside. During the summertime it wasn't so bad, but in the winter time, of course, one winter we were at a place called Casafrontano, where we dug into dugouts, and we had a piece of canvas over top, and it snowed, and we were chilled to the bone. But during that, the mountain position wasn't so bad because the weather was fine, and we had to sleep, of course, in what we call a slit trench, the Americans call them foxholes, and it was absolutely essential that you sleep underground, because during shelling, if you're underground in a small slit trench, you're fairly safe. It's when you're above the ground the dangers of getting hit by shrapnel. I guess it was kind of a feeling of relief that having been there for several months in one position, and the fact that we're going to move again, and we knew once Monte Casino had been conquered, it was the beginning of the end. that was really the last stand the Germans actually could take to stop us. And from there on, it was travelling all the time right up to the northern part of Italy when we landed in Trieste. So it was a great time of relief, and we were also told, of course, that when we moved, we would go for a break. We'd have 2 or 3 weeks off, and of course we did. We moved into Rome and stayed in Rome for a couple of weeks, and the troops rested there. So it was a kind of feeling of relief more than the joy that of winning, because it was a tragic situation. And I feel personally, and I think probably Freiburg and the rest of them feel this, that many mistakes were made, both in the first attack of the Americans and also New Zealand troops. Freiburg was bent on one thing, that the New Zealand troops should take Monte Casino. And it seemed to us that he wanted to do with the New Zealand troops what the Americans failed to do.
Right.
But so it was probably a feeling of relief that we're going to move again, and it was, we're heading for the end. That's what we were looking for. We travelled to Rome. The American troops were the first to go into Rome. This made the New Zealand troops very, very upset and envious, because they went in as the first heroes, and of course coming into Rome there were great crowds of people to welcome us, and they're crying out, "Viva Inglesi, Viva Americano, Viva Nova Zelandia," and but we were about the last to get in, I guess, to Rome. And of course by that time the troops had joined up with the invasion from the sea north of Monte Casino, and the Germans had retreated back some distance. So it was really a little time of peace, I guess. One expression would explain it: home at last. Home at last. It was quite a wonderful, wonderful feeling. It's something that probably you couldn't explain in words, that we're coming home, and having spent time in Cairo, and when we arrived back in the little hometown in Pukekohe, there was a big welcome at the wharf, of course. But when we arrived back in the Pukekohe railway station, where my parents were living at that time, of course, they had a band out there, and you felt quite a hero, really. Most of my comrades were from the South Island, and of course when we left Wellington they travelled south, and I came north, and the comradeship there was just something hard to describe. There was such a wonderful comradeship, and I remember saying to some of the boys from the South Island, well, when I get time in a month or two I'll come back and see you. But I never got back, and it was 40 years later that I went to this place, and I knew Alec White was from there, and I was passing through there 40 years later, and I called in to get some petrol, and I said to the chap, the attendant, "You know a chap by the name of Alec White?" He said, "Oh yeah, we know Alec." He gave me his address, so I went to meet him. This was after 40 years, and I knocked at his door, and he yelled out, "Come in." And as soon as he saw me, there was just that bond, that wonderful bond. Yeah. So that's something. That's something the war did that brought people together in a very wonderful. Prior to my going to the war, I was very reserved. I was a nervous kind of person, and it did a lot for me. It made me appreciate the things that we have here at home. It made me appreciate people more. most of all comradeship. You know, I still appreciate good friends, and during the war we had really good friends. Strangely though, at times you'd hear two soldiers arguing over a piece of bread and that sort of thing, you know. But when it came down to the crunch, you know, when things were tough, there was an absolute oneness there among the people. So I think that's probably what it taught me. It's taught me a lot. It taught me many, many things. It's taught me probably to be independent, because when I left New Zealand, I was a young person and very dependent upon my parents and others. But the feeling when I left the shores of New Zealand, look, oh Rod, you've got to look after yourself now, you see. So it may be a little bit aggressive. I don't know whether, I don't think I was just the opposite before I left New Zealand. There was no aggression in my nature, but there has been, and probably it has caused that. So that's probably not good, is it? But there are other good things that come through, and especially probably comradeship, and to appreciate all those lovely things we have in New Zealand.
Right.